and a pleasure to join you in a very far away place from here. I guess I'm supposed to be talking something like 13 minutes. Maybe somebody can let me know when I'm close to getting 13 minutes, such that I will not overspend your time. Okay. Let me introduce my topic. I'm going to talk about emergency constitutions, who has them, who uses them, and are they effective? A very, very broad question. Let me try to motivate my topic a little bit. So at any single time, a substantial part of the world population lives under a state of emergency. So here are a couple of numbers to basically prove that claim. So in this 30-year period between 1985 and 2014, at least 137 countries declared a state of emergency on the nation-state level at least once. So this is, roughly speaking, 2/3 of all countries of the world. Okay. Some countries could be said to be under a never-ending state of emergency, so to speak. So Syria has been such a case. Israel has been under a state of emergency ever since it's been founded in 1948. And Egypt has, with a couple of small little tiny exceptions, been under a state of emergency ever since 1981. Now, we are in a pandemic right now. And during the first couple of months of the pandemic in early 2020, we did a count, and we counted that at least 99 governments had declared a state of emergency due to the pandemic. Now, so the state of emergency is being used quite a bit, but is it also important? Would be the next question. And we basically assume that it has far-reaching consequences in a double sense. So the first sense in which it has far-reaching consequences would be that there's a shift in the balance of powers away from the legislature, away from the judiciary, and rather towards the executive branch. And there is a second far-reaching consequence, namely that oftentimes basic rights of citizens are suspended for quite some time. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm an economist, and I've been analyzing constitutions. And what we want to do here is we want to analyze what we refer to as emergency constitutions. So these are not extra documents, not additional documents, but we refer to the term, we use the term emergency constitution to refer to those rules in a constitution, in a nation state's constitution, that basically deals with emergencies. Okay, so that it's just an emergency constitution for short. And interestingly, 9 out of 10 countries have such emergency constitutions. Now, when we look at the number of times that states of emergencies are being declared and the potentially far-reaching consequences, it's really amazing how little we know about this animal. And what I'm going to do in the remaining, whatever it is, 27 minutes, I'll try to summarize some of my work that I've been doing over the last couple of years together with a Danish colleague, Christian Bjørnskov, from the University of Aarhus in Denmark. So let me basically give you the structure of my talk. First, I want to talk a little bit about the issue, who has emergency constitutions. I then turn to the issue, once you have them, you don't need to use them. So the next question would be, under what conditions are they being used? The next question, somewhat astray, in this case would be, are they used lawfully? Because you can also declare a state of emergency in an unlawful manner. And the next question is then straightforward again: are they effective? Are they effective in the goals they purport to reach? Then I'll, if any time remains, I'll quickly talk about the current pandemic and ask if there's any difference between this time and previous times, and then I will be concluding. So to turn to the first question, who has emergency constitutions? The slide here basically gives you an overview over the proportion of all countries in the world between 1850 and 2010 that have had emergency constitutions. And what you see is there is a steady rise. There has been a steady rise in the proportion of countries having emergency constitutions ever since 1950, where it was about 65% of all countries, up to 90% right now. So the next question would be, what do they cover? What are the events that basically justify the declaration of a state of emergency according to a country's constitution? And we don't need to go through the details of the slide, but what it tries to show is that ever more constitutions include ever more topics, ever more reasons that potentially justify the declaration of a state of emergency. Okay, so for example, war and aggression was a topic that was mentioned in around 32% of all constitutions in 1950, and that number had increased to almost half of all constitutions in 2011. And you see that most of these percentages have been increasing over this, whatever it is, 60-year period. Now, what we rely on to analyze some of the issues that I just mentioned, some of the questions that I raised, is what we refer to as the index of emergency powers. So this is based on constitutional text, and we basically look at 6 variables. We look at what we refer to as 3 cost components and 3 benefit components. So the cost components basically refer to how difficult it is to declare a state of emergency. You know, do you need 1 actor or 2 actors or 3 actors? Do you need super majorities? Do you even need a court decision, etc.? And so we look at, you know, how costly, how difficult it is. And then we also look at the benefits from the point of view of the government. You know, what additional powers are conveyed onto the government once it has declared a state of emergency? You know, can it postpone elections? Can it reduce the freedom of the press? Can it dissolve parliament? Issues like that. Now, what we do is we code these 6 components between 0 and 1, and 1 always indicates an essentially unconstrained executive. So higher numbers mean sort of less cost for government to declare a state of emergency. It means more benefits once it has declared. Okay, and I'll now just quickly give you sort of an impression of how this ICLEPP has developed. You know, this is the average over all countries of the world. How it has developed between 1950 and 2010. And what you can see is that the average ICLEPP value in 1950 was around 0.23, and it was raised up to something like 0.33 or 0.34 60 years later. So in other words, constitutions have been developing. There has been a trend of giving more powers to the executive under a state of emergency. And below you see a couple of numbers for some recently passed constitutions. As you can see, in Europe, at least, the Hungarian constitution is sort of infamous, and it does have a very high ICLEPP value, just as we would expect from the news that we get from Hungary. So let me quickly sum up so far. What we know is that 9 out of 10 countries have emergency constitutions. Emergency constitutions tend to cover ever more issues, and emergency constitutions tend to allocate more powers to the executive. Now, can we identify the factors determining differences in emergency constitutions, right? So the question is not, you know, would a country have an emergency constitution? We know that 90% of all countries do, but what are the differences between them? And what are the drivers behind them, basically? And here are a couple of potentially relevant determinants. You know, the frequency of disasters. If you are subject to a high probability of suffering from a disaster, you might have an emergency constitution that gives additional powers to the government. Composition of the Constitutional Assembly. If the Constitutional Assembly of a country is basically dominated by the executive, well, it might shift more powers to the executive, and so forth. And I will not go through all the results in detail. I will give you 2 results here. and the first one is sort of amazing, and that's why I'm pointing to it in red letters here. So the first result is that countries that are very prone to natural disasters give fewer additional powers to their government under emergencies. So we try to make sense out of this by saying, well, you know, they might have so many experiences, they know what to do in case a natural disaster occurs. They don't need so many extra powers. This is at least one way to try to make sense of this result. The second finding is completely in line with, if you want, political economy considerations. So what we find is that if the Constitutional Assembly, the people who write the Constitution, has been or was dominated by members of the legislature, then these legislators, these would-be future legislators, are less likely to delegate lots of powers to the executive. Okay, so this is completely in line with political economy considerations. Next question then, when are emergency constitutions used? Now, I know that during the current pandemic, India has been very careful not to declare a state of emergency, and it might be due to the experiences that your country suffered through a number of years back. I don't need to repeat this in any detail here. But let's try to not to look at India, but let's try to look at basically most countries of the world. So we start with the assumption that politicians prefer more power over less power, and the benefit of declaring an emergency would then be a function of the additional powers that a state of emergency conveys to a government, right? If I'm already an autocrat, basically unconstrained, well, why should I declare a state of emergency? You know, I already have all the powers. If I am, on the other hand, a tightly constrained parliamentary system where I can, you know, as a government, I can be sent home every single day, in that case, you know, being able to declare a state of emergency might be very beneficial to me. Hence, the first hypothesis, the larger the power differential that government enjoys under a state of emergency compared to a non-emergency, the higher the probability that it will declare a state of emergency. And then we have a second hypothesis, namely, the more difficult it is to secure consent to declaring a state of emergency, the lower the probability of its declaration. So in other words, if it is very costly, well, you know, then according to economic logic, it'll occur less frequently. Okay, so those are two hypotheses regarding the actual use of states of emergency. I'll just tell you a little bit about how we went about getting to empirical insights here. So the trick, basically, the only thing that one needs to think of before running any regressions is that, well, we need to take into account situations in which a government could have declared a state of emergency but did not, right? I mean, if we only look at the cases where it has been declared, well, you know, then we cannot really learn a lot. So we need to compare cases in which it could have been declared and was not, with cases in which it could have been declared and indeed was declared. Okay, and this is how we went about you know, finding empirical evidence here. And yeah, I explained a little bit you know, how we did this in detail. I don't think that this is so relevant. So again, I want to just run by you some of the results. So first of all, what we learn is there is it's crucial to distinguish between natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcano outbreaks, etc. on the one hand, and political disasters on the others. You know, mass demonstrations, assassination attempts, general strikes, etc. That is, you know, these are indeed completely different animals. So the reasoning behind declaring or non-declaring states of emergency are also really different. Higher levels of domestic conflict increase the likelihood of calling a state of emergency. Based on political disasters, that seems to be pretty straightforward. Parliamentary governments are less likely to declare compared to presidential governments, which in a sense is not in line with the first hypothesis that I just gave you. And the sort of the more interesting results, or the results that we were particularly interested in, are the following. So the less costly it is to declare a state of emergency for a government, the more likely it is to do so. So this is exactly in line with our second hypothesis. Interestingly, the benefit side of the ICLEPP, what additional powers the government gets once it has declared a state of emergency, doesn't pop up as significant in our models here. So I guess I'm rushing through this. I guess I could take a little more time. The next question would be, are emergency constitutions used lawfully? So here the question is, that there might be governments that declare a state of emergency and do so only for out of reputational concerns. They probably declare it and then they don't stick to the rules. So in order to answer that issue, we think of three ways in which governments can behave unconstitutionally with regard to a state of emergency. And this is, I think, also pretty straightforward. So the first possibility is to declare it unlawfully. Okay, so assume you have a bicameral legislator and two chambers need to agree, and only one agrees. Then the declaration would be unlawful. Okay. Then there could be an unlawful implementation. Assume the Constitution doesn't allow the government to postpone any elections, but the government does postpone elections. So then in that case, we would talk of an unlawful implementation. And finally, you could also think of an unlawful prolongation. If the Constitution says the maximum duration of a state of emergency is something like 6 months, and it lasts for 9 or 12 or 15 months, and it's not renewed, the declaration is not renewed, then we would talk of sort of an unlawful length or an unlawful prolongation of a state of emergency. Okay? Now, I will develop a number of, just run by you a number of hypotheses, which I believe are, again, pretty straightforward. So the first hypothesis is that autocrats are less likely to comply with the constitutional constraints than governments of democratic countries. And I don't think I need to justify that hypothesis at any length. The second hypothesis is that executives not complying with constitutions during normal times are less likely to comply under a state of emergency. So in other words, the idea is if under sort of normal business, the constraints of the Constitution are not being taken seriously by the government, it oversteps them time and again, why should it then stick to the constraints under a state of emergency? Okay, and then you could ask, so but why would they declare a state of emergency in the first place then? Well, as I just mentioned, it could be that there could be various reasons. It could be a sort of international reputation. We're declaring a state of emergency, this gives us extra power, etc. It could also be as a signal to the opposition, right? If there is domestic violence or domestic issues, then declaring a state of emergency could be a signal to the opposition, hey, you guys, we mean business. We are serious about curtailing your rights, and you better stay at home and stop demonstrating, okay? So there are reasons for governments that never plan to stick to the constraints of the Constitution to declare a state of emergency nevertheless. The third hypothesis would be that domestic turmoil rather than natural disaster is associated with unconstitutional emergencies. And I think that's pretty straightforward in the sense that domestic turmoil in all likelihood is putting the existing government under additional pressure. There might be opposition demonstrations, etc., going on. So it's the survival of the government could be at stake, which is not the case, not necessarily the case, at least with regard to natural disasters. So with regard to domestic turmoil, we assume at least that the government is more likely to overstep the constitutional constraints. Then again, I told you we would need this for basically all the parts of this talk, the ICLEPP. So here the argument is the following: if it is very costly to declare a state of emergency, but the government still wants to declare a state of emergency, it might simply choose to declare it unlawfully, not following the rules of the game. And in particular, we expect this to be the case in countries that have a bicameral system where both chambers need to agree. Okay, so you might have a majority in the lower house, but not in the upper house. Then you might want to have a vote in the lower house, declare it, although the upper house has never agreed to it. That is what we have in mind here. And then also we look at the benefit ICLEPP. So the benefit ICLEPP is the additional benefits that government enjoys under a state of emergency. So if it enjoys lots of benefits, well, then it probably does not need to overstep the Constitution. Okay, so in other words, we expect a low degree of unlawfulness under under high benefit ICLEPP values. And those are the hypotheses. I will not talk about how we collected the data or just mention it very briefly. We consulted human rights reports, NGO reports, LexisNexis, lots and lots of newspaper reports, and asked whether a state of emergency was interpreted as being unlawful by a number of experts. Okay, and if you do that for a number of decades, what you get is can be basically shown in this very simple matrix here. So making a distinction between democratic countries and autocratic countries on the one hand, and between natural disasters and domestic turmoil on the other, we find that there were 271 cases of natural disasters causing the declaration of a state of emergency in democracies. Okay, so this is what the first number means. As you can see, natural disasters and domestic turmoil are basically almost the same with regard to democracies, but, and this is the number in parentheses, only 8 of these 271 cases were deemed to be unconstitutional. So this seems to be a fairly small or tiny fraction, whereas 41 out of 241 cases with regard to domestic turmoil were deemed to be unconstitutional. And you see the numbers are somewhat different, or the proportions are somewhat different with regard to autocracies. There were only 68 declarations of a state of emergency following a natural disaster in autocracies, but 6 of them, so that's almost 10%, were deemed to be unconstitutional. And with regard to domestic turmoil, the numbers are fairly similar between democracies and autocracies. Now, how are we doing regarding our hypotheses? So most of them, but not all of them, most of them are confirmed. So in autocracies, as expected, autocrats, I should say, autocratic governments, as expected, are more likely to overstep constitutional constraints. Secondly, also as expected, governments that show a low respect for the constitutional constraints under non-emergency times are also more likely to overstep the Constitution under a state of emergency. Presidential systems are more likely to, are more likely to experience an unlawful state of emergency. And finally, you will remember this cost ICLEPP consideration when it's more difficult to declare. This is exactly what we find. Countries with bicameral legislature are more likely to experience an unlawful declaration of a state of emergency than unicameral ones. Okay, so now back on track. So who has them? Who uses them? And then the next question would be, are they effective? And this is what I'm going to talk about now. And actually, I might skip a little bit here because what we do or we did in our research is we first looked at natural disasters and only then at other events such as terrorist incidents. Why did we do this? Well, natural disasters are sufficiently exogenous events, whereas terrorist incidents, can be very endogenous to government behavior, depending on the suppression of people or the feeling of people being suppressed or whatever it is. They might turn a terrorist. So in a sense, they are very endogenous events, which makes identification, the empirics behind these things a lot more difficult. So this is why we started with natural disasters. Because we can assume them to be exogenous events. Probably not all of their effects, right? If construction permits are not being handed out because the construction plans are solid, but because a larger bribe was being paid, then you might have an earthquake and all the buildings might be tumbling down. That is obviously not entirely exogenous, but the earthquake as such, it can be considered as exogenous. Okay. Now, the issue here is that natural disasters can be occurring on very different scales. You can have a small little earthquake, or you can have an earthquake, basically affecting 10 million people. So we somehow need to control for the size, for the scale of the natural disaster, to make them comparable. And we do this by taking into account the number of people affected by a tsunami, earthquake, volcano outbreak, drought, whatever it is. Okay, so we control for the number of people affected, and what we are interested in is the number of people who are being killed. So the idea is, by quick action following a natural disaster, the number of people being killed can be made smaller than if it takes a long time and if things are not run smoothly. Okay, so that is the logic behind this here. And as explanatory variables, we have the index of emergency powers, INEP, which is playing a prominent role in all our papers, whether a state of emergency has been declared or not. And we have a couple of controls with regard to geographic, economic, and political factors. Okay. And again, here are some of the results. So the more people are affected, the more people die, which is pretty straightforward. The larger the population of a country, the more people die, which is also pretty straightforward. And the higher the income of a country, the fewer people die. This is all as expected. Now, presidential systems in this case seem to be doing slightly better in preventing people from being killed as compared to parliamentary ones. Democracy, there doesn't seem to be a difference here. Overall, with regard to all types of disasters, we make a distinction between various types of natural disasters. The cost INEP is not significant, but here are some more detailed results. So here it is that the benefit INEP is highly correlated with the number of people killed, and this implies that the more benefits the executive derives according to the emergency constitutions, the more people die subsequent to a natural disaster. So this is a completely unexpected result. It would basically say that overall emergency constitutions do not seem to be very effective. Indeed, they seem to be sort of a hindrance to dealing effectively with natural disasters. More people are being killed. So it could be that they are simply misused by governments who want to basically extend their powers and want to hand out goodies to whomever, but they're not really interested in curtailing the effects of a natural disaster. If we look at specific types of disasters, namely geophysical and hydrological ones, then the cost INEP does become significant. And now I think in the interest of time, I'll simply skip. We have two papers focusing on terrorist events and the issue to what degree emergency constitutions as such, but also declaring a state of emergency subsequent to a terrorist incident are effective in preventing future terrorist incidents. We have two papers on that. So one deals basically with Western democracies, and the other one deals with Muslim majority countries, because they are the most terror-prone countries in the world. So if you're interested in that, both of these papers appeared, I think, last year and the year before. So you might want to have a look at that. So let me, try to close with this question: is this time different? So one could say, hey, I mean, there's this pandemic going on, so maybe this time political economy factors don't really get us as far as with regard to previous emergencies, be they natural disasters or terrorist incidents. So we asked two questions: what are the factors that make governments declare a state of emergency, and once a state of emergency has been declared, what are the effects? And very briefly, we find that if a country has a high rule of law, it's less likely to declare. There's a high degree of media freedom, it's also less likely to declare. But here's the benefit INEP again: if government sort of gets lots of benefits out of declaring a state of emergency, it's more likely to declare. So in other words, there is really nothing very much different in this pandemic compared to previous disasters. There's nothing new under the sun, as I write here, and political economy considerations loom large. Yeah, this is an extra goodie, but I will not go into it in the interest of time. So let me just conclude. What we find is that emergency constitutions are more than black letter law. They do have effects. They do channel the behavior of governments the world over. I didn't show you the paper with regard to the Muslim majority countries, which are almost completely autocratic. There's very few democracies among them. But we can show that the benefit INEP and the cost INEP do have a number of effects. So emergency constitutions do channel government behavior. However, their actual effects are often not in line with their officially declared intentions. And we suspect that they are not reformed. One could say, well, if they're not not effective, why not reform them? We suspect that they're not reformed because they are politically attractive. And obviously, there are a couple of additional steps that still need to be researched to basically give us a complete picture regarding emergency constitutions and their effects. What has been suspected by a number of authors recently is that states of emergency might be sort of a first step of would-be autocrats to basically speed up democratic backsliding. So the argument is that if there's any reason to declare a state of emergency, this would give extra powers to the executive, and the executive could then misuse this to basically reduce the level of democracy in a country. We are not entirely sure that this is really the case, but we are currently working on precisely that issue. And I was asked to give you a couple of references. So I'm sorry, there's quite a few. these are all the papers basically behind what I've been saying over the last 31 minutes. It is by now. So thanks very much for your attention. If you're interested in some more details, please refer to ResearchGate, where we have a project on this. So you'll find more information there. If you're interested in sort of what I do personally, you can follow me either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And so much for now.
Thank you, Professor. Khushi, just a second. Thank you, Professor. And our apologies because, it was scheduled that we start with introducing you and moderating the session that Professor Prasad is to do. Professor Prasad was having some connectivity problems. He's here now. He's joined us. So if you permit it, then we will do it we'll do it now at the conclusion. So that was my intervention. Professor Prasad, please take over.
Hello, do you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Oh, okay. Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I think there is a little bit of not state of emergency, but there are some technical issues. Yeah, hello, Professor Fogit. How are you? Yeah, so can I now introduce Professor Vogt? Is it okay?
Pardon me, sir. Pardon me. Couldn't hear you.
Can I introduce him now?
Yeah, please do, sir. Please do. Please do.
Yeah. So thank you for giving this opportunity. And always I love to be associate one or the other way with Institute of Law and Economics, University of Hamburg, and then the Law and Economics in India. So, and where specifically the GNLU is really actively carrying out academic activities in this interdisciplinary subject. Yeah, Professor Vogt is serving as director at the Institute of Law and Economics, University of Hamburg, since 2009. And he also contributed academic activities at various universities and institutions, including Max Planck Institute in Economics in Jena. And he also really published a book on institutional economics, and also the volume series specifically on constitutional political economy. And he is a co-publisher of Review of Law and Economics and a member of numerous editorial boards such as Public Choice and Constitutional Political Economy and Review of Austrian Economics. Given this, I really would like to gain a lot from him about this constitutional issues, and then what are the benefits and costs of it. But however, there were some technical issues. I couldn't able to concentrate much on his talk. I really lost the opportunity to moderate the session in a more comprehensive manner. This is what I would like to really say at this moment. Maybe once after having this question and answer session, if I have something, I would like to interact with him at the end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Khushi, you want to take over, and maybe you can just take 2 minutes and introduce Dr. Prasad also. I'm sorry, we are kind of, there's a lag effect that is happening. So Khushi, if you could do that and then open the session to question answers.
Oh, definitely, ma'am. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Dr. Murli Prasad. We're very happy to have you here, sir. Professor Dr. Murli Prasad has been a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology at Kanpur, and he has an array of research and experience, conferences, and literature to his name. His areas of research interests include law and economics, environment and environmental economics. He has been a fellow at the Erasmus Mundus Faculty Mobility Scholarships, as well as the DAD Fellowship scholarships. We're very happy to have you here today, sir. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions for Professor Dr. Voigt.
Ms. Shreya, sorry, who introduced me? Can I know the name?
Yes, sir. This is Khushi.
Kushi, yeah. Ms. Kushi, thank you for this introductory remarks, but I would like to propose a small, a little bit of change. It is not a faculty fellowship. It is when I was PhD student, I got the German Academic Exchange Service Fellowship. It is not at faculty level, but it is at student level. Thank you.
My sincere apologies, sir.
Thank you.
With permission of chair, yeah, moderation, can I ask a question, sir? If it's
Yeah, please.
yeah, Professor Stephen Woget, I completely go through your presentation, but still I don't know when you are writing when you are doing that research, you may have not factor in the current what is going in Russia, Ukraine. And post that, I think possibility what you are proposing, where I think there may be some of the different factoring may happen even for the other than the what factors you have taken in context of the democracy and that part. If you want to comment on something on that.
Well, that's a difficult issue. Obviously, it's a very, very pressing issue, obviously, but very difficult. So that concerns international relations. It concerns the relationship between independent nation states that are supposed to be sovereign according to international law, which is something that we have not really focused on because thankfully over the last 75 years or so, that has not been the major issue in the world. I know there have always been wars going on, and the sovereignty of independent nation states has not always been recognized, but it has not been the central issue. I mean, again, I gave you the numbers, during the current pandemic, at least 99 governments, that is half of all governments of the world, had declared a state of emergency. Now, if you want to have a very brief take, obviously I have an opinion on what's going on there. It seems that there is one autocratic government that wants to reestablish its former grandeur, if you want. Wants to rejuvenate some sort of empire. And there have been a couple of cases before 2008 in Georgia, where basically the West didn't really intervene. Georgia wanted to join NATO, and as a warning, Russian troops basically went into Georgia to defend Russian interests, Russian-speaking groups in that country. And then, as you remember, Crimea, the island was taken by Russian troops in 2014, and I think that was basically the major mistake, the major error of the West, not to basically let Putin go with that. It was, in a sense, it can be considered a test case. Putin said, "Well, I'm taking Ukraine, I'm taking Crimea." they're not really reacting harshly. So, you know, why don't I try to do the same with the whole country? But I'm not a military expert. I don't want to give you any probabilities on how long it's going to take and how ugly it's going to be, what the final outcome will be. I just think it's amazing how strongly many people in Ukraine have been reacting to it. I can tell you, I have doctoral students from Russia, from Ukraine, but also from Poland. And obviously, they are extremely worried about what's going on. My Polish doctoral student, you know, is in Poland right now, transporting refugees from Ukraine into other parts of Poland, and I think that's a very nice thing. Also to see the degree of solidarity, if you want, of people from Poland, but also the other surrounding countries with Ukrainian refugees. I mean, you know, it's been 1.5 million refugees over the last 10 days or so, which is quite a bit. Poland is a country of 38 million inhabitants, so basically hosting around 1 million overnight is quite an achievement. So that's the nice thing about it. You know, the solidarity among the people, but very difficult to tie it to emergency constitutions. To be very honest.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor Vogt, there is one question from Mr. Subnaik. He is basically asking you, please elaborate on how bicameral legislations are more likely to face unlawful emergencies.
Well, thanks for the question. So here the idea was, you know, the general idea is very simple. The general idea is, if it is very costly in economic terminology and more straightforward terminology, if it is very difficult to lawfully declare a state of an emergency, well, that increases the chances that it will be declared unlawfully, right? You know, if it's, you know, if I need the consent of so many veto players, of so many actors, then it's more difficult than if I, the president, can go it alone. That's the general hypothesis. And so we looked at it a little more closely, and our suspicion was, well, you know, if you have bicameral legislators and both chambers need to agree to the declaration of a state of emergency, then you need 2 majorities, right? Compared to a unicameral legislature, you only need 1 majority. And the idea was, well, you know, it's more difficult to secure two majorities rather than only 1. So as a consequence, we assume that bicameral legislatures or countries that have bicameral legislatures would be more likely to overstep their own constitutions with regard to the declaration of a state of emergency. And this is exactly what we found. I hope this has become clearer now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, any more questions, please? Yeah, there is another one from the same person, Subnaik. I will just read that question. Are the governments able to achieve the end goal of declaring emergency, or at the end, the economic cost of emergencies are always greater than the economic benefits of the same? Thank you.
Okay, so this basically has, you know, has a take on states of emergencies from an economic point of view, not only regarding the method but regarding the substance, right? So we've been using the economic approach for analyzing the rules and effects, and we've largely been concerned with changes in basic rights, changes in the democracy scores, etc. So we have not really been looking into economic effects, but there are obviously papers on this, and some of these papers show that at the end of the day, an emergency, when lots of foreign aid comes in, can lead to a sort of a modernization of some of the infrastructure of a country, which at the end of the day could mean that the growth rates even pick up after various kinds of natural disasters. But this refers primarily to natural disasters. So you have an earthquake someplace, some of the infrastructure is being destroyed. The IMF, the World Bank, and bilateral donor organizations come in. They help you reestablish an infrastructure which leads to a more modern infrastructure than before, which could then lead to positive growth effects. But there are quite a few papers on this, but this is not what we are primarily concerned with. We are concerned with the issue whether the rule of law, democracy, basic human rights are being curtailed by states of emergency.
Yeah.
Professor, Chair, if you permit me.
No, go ahead, Professor Vanitha.
Professor, again, this might be beyond the scope of what research you've undertaken, but are there some suggestions into what can be done at a constitutional level, to ensure or to at least limit these consequences?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question too, concerning sort of, if you want, the normative implications of all these results, right? So what's the message, or what's the beef? I mean, what are the consequences? First of all, as I told you, I think 90% of all countries of the world have an emergency constitutions, implying that 10% do not. So the first question would be, should one have an emergency constitution at all? And my answer would be yes, although the results are not they don't seem to be very effective. I'm still in favor of countries having an emergency constitution. Why? Because if they are being complied with by governments, they would reduce uncertainty, right? They would reduce uncertainty for all citizens involved, for all players involved, because an emergency constitution basically would inform everybody what the government is allowed to do under a state of emergency. Okay, so it would have an uncertainty reducing function, which is likely to have positive effects. So in that sense, although the results have not been very positive, if the question is, should a country have an emergency constitution, yes, no, I would still go for the yes. I would also go for the yes, because in all likelihood, we're gonna see more emergencies over the next couple of decades. When we started this research, there was no pandemic. Now we have a pandemic that is a huge emergency the world over. But there's also likely to be effects of climate change and so on and so forth. So trying to reduce the degree of uncertainty, I think, is very important. And then I think it's important to be as clear as possible on what the government is supposed to do, is allowed to do, and what it is not allowed to do. And maybe as a last idea, I think one of the major dangers of states of emergency is that there are decrees that are being passed under a state of emergency, or laws even that are passed under a state of emergency, that then once the state of emergency is over, keep on existing. Okay, so in essence, the democratic rights might be curtailed, basic human rights might be curtailed, not only during the state of emergency, but basically infinitely. So I think an important aspect of thinking about, how emergency constitutions should optimally look like would be to make sure that those decrees that are being passed under a state of emergency should basically end to have any effects. Should not be valid beyond the end of the state of emergency. But if you're interested in those questions, I had a paper which basically looks at some of these normative issues last year in a philosophical journal. It's basically in the realm of social contract theory, the thinking there.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Vogt. Yeah, if no more questions, I have few. Can I allowed to interact? No, it is very, very important one, as Professor Vogt mentioned, that the instance of this increasing, even his data also reveals that. So basically the war, financial and the other one is related to like the act of God related. Even in act of God, like pandemics and natural disasters, even there is man-made disasters. So when we talk about declaring of emergencies, it is within the territorial integrity of a given nation. But however, the world is more integrated now in various aspects. If any one country, whatever may be the reasons of declaring emergency, it will also have directly, indirectly having impact on other things. So in that case, is there any possibility like having some kind of institutional setup at world level where if any country is really not at the public interest, but at individual interest, even political parties, to keep its position, its power by unlawful manner, if it declares emergency, is there any possibility of having some kind of structural, functional, and legalities where the member nations can really interfere and say that, look, this is not the one which you need to do. If you do, then I think we will really give you some kind of trade embargo or whatever sanctions. I think I think the world want to see everything to be good. That is what I think whoever is really here today in this August gathering, listening your the needy subject. All of us want everybody would like to have a smiling face. Nobody is really interested to have a sourness. If that is what the ultimate goal of across the mankind in the world, then why this kind of some kind of disturbance is really encouraged, even in 21st century, where information communication technology is there. Whatever happens, even by next second, all of us will come to know that what's going on across the world, given that kind of connectivity we do have. Is there any possibility of like-minded individuals, like-minded countries that we won't allow any kind of dirt? And we always really want mankind safety and security. Is there any possibility to have that kind of clean, transparent kind of institution, which it is possible, Professor Vogt? Thank you.
Well, that's obviously a very, very, very big question, and obviously impossible to answer. Just a couple of thoughts on just maybe two thoughts on this. So first of all, if you look at international organizations, there is a concept like a state of emergency for international organizations too. I mean, look at currently the World Health Organization, so the WHO, has declared a state of emergency with regard to the pandemic. And one could look more deeply into what that really means, what that really implies. And obviously here again, I would assume that political economy reasons do play an important role, right? If I'm at the WHO, I might be interested in people being healthy, but I'm also interested in the WHO playing an important role. Okay, so this is one idea. The second idea is referring more to Europe. I mean, in a sense, the European Union has a constitution, right? I mean, we have the Treaty of the European Union, and we have the treaties on the functioning of the European Union, and the Treaty of the European Union can be considered as the constitution of the European Union. And interestingly, we don't have an emergency constitution in the Treaty for the European Union, which might be a problem because in cases, when you have the sovereign bonds crisis, with regard to Greece and other countries, in a sense, Brussels, the European Union, needed to overstep the constraints laid down in the Treaty on the European Union simply to save the euro. And this shows you that if a country, or in this case a supranational association of countries, doesn't have an emergency constitution, additional degrees of uncertainty will be the result. So in that sense, your question is very well taken. One should think about how supranational organizations such as the EU, but also international organizations such as all the United Nations system, should probably think more deeply about emergencies on an international plane.
Yeah, thank you very much. Madam, would you like to close the session, or maybe some informal talk with the professor?
Since there are no questions coming up, then it's up to the moderator, sir, to take the call, conclude the session, and with, of course, an open invitation to Professor White for sessions at GNLU in our law and economics courses, and definitely at conferences also. So we will be asking you to, whenever you have the time, our students will be very, very happy to learn from you. So on that note, I think we can conclude. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Voigt and Professor Prasad both. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Sorry to jump in now. Thank you both very much for having me, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference. I see you have a very busy day tomorrow and ahead of you. So all the best for all of you, and yeah, see you around next time. Maybe also in Europe.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. So
Thank you,
ma'am.
Prasad, sir.
Can we leave? So how is the first day? I couldn't able to join, ma'am.
We'll send you the what's that link for the inaugural,
Okay.
and we will have all recordings for the plenary, so you'll be updated
Yeah, it will be available at
session by session. Yes.
Yeah, so good luck for tomorrow's conference. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Professor Prasad.
Bye. Bye. Bye to everyone.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, should I end the meeting?
Ask Dr. Thakkar. He is in command.
Please go ahead, complete it.
Ask him.
So, should
Yeah,
I?
yeah, go ahead, complete it.
Thank you everyone for joining in, and I will request you to kindly join us tomorrow for the second day for the remaining 2 plenary sessions and the technical sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Thakkar. Good evening, one and all.